This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Micayla Deardorff. Did I say your name right, Deardorff?
Yeah, yes.
Um, so you're a feminist, musician, and fellow podcaster, and your podcast is PHILOSOshe.
Mhm.
And we have your link to the URL for that. That will be fully clickable for anybody who wants to click on that once we're fully published. And I want to welcome you to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
Oh, thank you. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Um, One of the things we want to let people know, we are a featured podcast on the Newsly network. And if you want to check that out, you can use the coupon code GHOST. We'll be on Newsly later tonight in an audio only version of the podcast. So people can check that out. As I said, we have your philosophy buzzsprout.com link there, and people can check that out. And we're going to do kind of a free ranging type of podcast. But as I mentioned, you're a singer songwriter, you're a photographer, videographer, entrepreneur, and podcaster. And one of the things we always ask anybody who's on the podcast first, the first two questions is, what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Oh man, I think motivation is a word that I've had to, have a weird relationship with over the years because motivation is fleeting. Something I've really had to learn since graduating college is discipline because I'm not given like a structure anymore as a freelancer, as a creative. I'm actually applying for jobs with more structure, coincidentally,
Mhm.
because I would love to have some kind of like work life balance. But as far as like what motivates me when it comes to being creative, it's a number of different things. It's other creators, it's different, music I hear, movies I see, seeing people put themselves out there in different ways. So it really just depends. Right now, I'm really inspired by, the different shows my husband and I have been watching. We just finished the first season of Fallout, so that was kind of cool to watch. Very creative. So yeah.
It's interesting because I talk to a lot of creative people, and I'm kind of a big purveyor of like the happy accident or flow state type of musician. You can see I'm in my studio with all
Yes.
my synthesizers. I'm a kind of a hardware guy. I'm a
Hmm.
synthesist, but I'm old school. Everybody's
Yeah.
on these sampling based machines and using AI, and I like to actually play my Roland or my
Yes.
Moog. And it's a strange thing today because a lot of people they're into perfection because we have this computer age where
Hmm.
you can just do something perfect. You can put it down and you can make it
Right.
like fit even if you couldn't
Mhm.
play it. And
Right.
yeah, I'm kind of a child of the 70s,
Yeah.
multi-track, play it until you get it or play it as it is.
Yes.
And what's your thoughts on that type of the different types of creative spaces that are out there today, and maybe the
Mhm.
urge for people to try to go to perfectionism because they can?
Right. I I have the utmost respect for people who produce their own music. It's something I really am trying to learn to do. I'm more of a singer at my core, singer-songwriter. So the production aspect doesn't come as easy to me. I'm more of a like right brain creative than analytical, and sometimes the production part of it really feels like math to me. So when it comes to the actual production of it, I mean, obvious artists that I really admire would be, well, a band would be the Beatles, and you can hear the imperfection in their music, but their imperfection makes it perfect. Like
It's
you
a
can
happy
hear
accident.
exactly. And I don't think that we should be, well, to each their own, but I personally don't want my music to sound like super produced and, perfect. Now, sometimes if it's not like a super complicated song, you can't really hear those imperfections because it's just like a simple production. But like there is so much value in like old school production, and I so respect it. But then again, if their art is to make it as perfect as they
Yeah,
can, then like respect to them too. So yeah.
yeah. We got the kind of I always talk about like Bruce Springsteen and the song "Born to Run." It took like 6 months to do the one song
Yeah,
because
that's wild.
they kept on doing the overdubs, kept on doing the Phil Spector wall of
Right.
sound. And it's not like everything he's ever done because he's done other things where like Nebraska was on a
Mm,
Tascam 4 track and it wasn't
mhm.
highly produced. So he kind of is
Wild.
it's kind of like what serves the song.
Right.
So
Yeah.
some songs require that level of trying to attain perfection that you never actually really hit, but
Yeah.
you're trying. And other songs are more like what's real about it is kind of a Neil Young approach with Crazy Horse.
Mhm.
It's like just put it down and let
Mhm.
your voice kind of pitch off just because that's what you're feeling, right?
Yeah.
If even though he could do the perfect pitch like Crosby,
Right.
Stills, Nash and Young, he
Right.
can't. But he chooses, and when he's with Crazy Horse, to kind of go at it in a kind of punk aesthetic where
Mhm.
it's not perfect. It might be the second, third take, and that's it. I'm not going to go back and fix it.
Right.
And that's okay,
Mhm.
and it's okay the other way too. But I think it's not like one or the other. I think there's shades of gray.
Yeah, I appreciate it all. I love it.
But what made you want to get into podcasting? I'm kind of jump to that because I'm a podcaster and I'm a musician and I kind of fell into it. So I'm
Mm.
wondering what your podcast story is.
Yeah, I commuted to my college the first 2 years, from my parents' house. I would drive 45 minutes every day to class, sometimes, and then once I met my husband, I would drive 45 minutes to class, an hour to the other campus, and then 45 minutes home. So I would be driving a lot, and so I got into listening to podcasts. I have a few favorites, such as like What We Said podcast, Ologies by Ali Ward. Um, a new one that I really like is We're Here to Help, and it's hosted by Jake Johnson and Gareth Reynolds. It's so funny. But just a podcast lover. But then also, I had this desire to, learn more once I graduated college. I was like, I'm not done learning. I can see the value in education even more now that I'm out of school, ironically. Could not appreciate it when I was in it. Didn't even like reading until I left college because if you're going to tell me what to read, like I don't want to read. But um I you know, I just saw the value in learning about humans and talking with humans and learning the connection. And I had a friend of mine who I used to do the podcast with. She's still my best friend. She's gonna go do her own creative endeavors with her writing and writing a book. But we started that our podcast together, PHILOSOshe, and we really wanted it to be built on just like feminism, pop culture, philosophy. Not philosophy in the sense of like we're studying philosophers every single episode. We do that, or I do that, but and even more so now in season 2 when it's just me. But just talking about life and talking about the human experience. Um, so I was like, yeah, could we do this? And we did it together and we haven't missed a week. And then when she bowed out and she started doing her own creative endeavors, I was like, I'm going to keep this going. And I didn't miss a week because I knew if I missed a week, I would never pick it back up again. But I'm grateful to have been doing this for like 2 years. Small following at this point still. It's not like my first priority when I wake up in the morning because, my freelance job making money is a little bit more important, but I would love for this someday to be some kind of job for me. It'd be so cool if it could be a full-time thing, but for now, if I can, reach one or two people and relate to them at the end of the day, then I mean, that's amazing in itself. So,
Podcasting, I think, is such a great way to continue kind of education because, like, if you think
oh yeah.
about it, if you go to college and you're in that, in that auditorium or you're in that class, and the
Mhm.
professor's like, that's that oral teaching method. It's like the oral
Yes.
transfer of knowledge. And
Mhm.
when you're in a conversation where it's like two or people or three people live and you're actually communicating, it's a
Mm.
very good way to retain new new ideas or
Right.
how people perceive things. And
Right.
I saw that you mentioned sociology, and I was a sociology major at the college I went to, but
That's cool.
the study of human beings and how they act at the macrocosm and the microcosm level,
Mhm.
and they kind of
Mhm.
cross between. And there's so much like relevance today
Yeah.
to actually being able to talk about things that words matter. They
Yeah.
affect people. Act, and people, when they start to talk, they can realize the power of the words, and they can get into you know,
Mhm.
actually connecting with other people who maybe never heard that before, or didn't
Right.
understand it, or didn't know everybody felt the same way,
Yep.
and you can relate and like heal people.
Yeah, relationships are so important, and I don't claim to be a, master of anything. I'm not a, medical professional by any means, and I never claim to be, but I want my podcast to be a space where I can ask questions that other people want to ask to professionals who do know, and also have those important conversations with regular everyday people who, are experiencing life. And I think the times where I struggle with my mental health the most are the times where I am isolated. We all went through the pandemic, and we saw that took a huge toll on our mental health. And when we were not around people, we don't we're not reminded that our experience is pretty normal and that people are also going through similar things. Not that anyone is invalidated because other people go through the same things, but to be reminded that you're not alone. Like,
Yeah,
stuff
that's a real
happens, and
important.
yeah. Mhm.
It's important to to realize you're not just on an island
Yeah,
and you're the only one that's feeling that. I mean, that's singer
exactly.
songwriters that you've got the other side of it. Like that's what we do. I mean, a lot of times as
Mhm.
a songwriter, you talk about your condition and it applies to the human condition, and people
Right.
find some relevance in your story.
Mhm.
And then it connects and people see that sound painting in their mind every
Yeah.
time they hear it, and how they interpret your song is based on their own individual life. And you might have had a common theme, but
Mhm.
it's very individual to every person who hears the song. And so
Mhm.
it's the same kind of thing when you're on a podcast or you're talking to people in the community, like
Yeah.
how people, receive it is not always the same way.
Right.
You can find the parallels where there are things that are common, but
Right.
everybody's an individual. And it's cool to have that back and forth kind of conversation to understand the
Mhm.
human condition, at
Mhm.
some level. Now you're not going to know everything, but
Mhm.
try to learn every day as much as you can.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it's like in terms of focusing like on your topics, I saw that you like to have a variety of guests, and I've been kind of a person that does that. But in terms of like choosing your topics, like you wanted to focus on feminist issues, but do you talk to other people outside of that?
Yeah, so let me, as far as, guests I have on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we talk about tons of different things. I have male and female guests and non-binary guests. Basically, I just want to talk to everybody, but at the core, we're talking about, again, the human experience, feminism, philosophy. We just talked about friendship in one of our episodes. We talked about intergenerational friendships in another episode, and just talking about how America as a whole, really needs to heal our family structures, because as a whole, each structure that goes up from there is a family structure, and how America just needs therapy because we're all just
Dysfunctional.
screwed up.
Yes.
um, we've talked
Codependent,
about
dysfunctional.
yeah, yeah, we've talked about all different things. We talked about actual philosophy. I had a friend of mine who majored in philosophy come on and talk about what it looks like to be a philosophy student. We've talked about I talked with Dr. Eric Fitzmadrud about his experience being a therapist who specializes in sex and sex education and relationship experience. And he talks specifically on how, how men are in relationships and how men can be more pro women and how we all need women. And so it's just we've had a lot of really cool conversations that open up different questions about, being a woman, but also being human. So it's really, really cool.
It seems today. I mean, I was just looking at a kind of issue with like some of the social media, or even like in the comic book industry, right? If you think about
Mm.
comic book fans, a lot of comic book fans are kind of very narrow minded in terms of like when they see female leads in like Marvel movies,
Oh, mhm,
they just immediately like they don't like it, and they'll
mhm,
just like destroy a movie before it even comes out.
mm,
Like reviews, and it's just like why do you feel that you own that? Why
mm,
can't other people be in the fantasy genre? Like, why can't you have open it up so there's not just one type of archetype?
mm.
And
Yeah.
it seems like in sometimes in science fiction or fantasy comic books, there's a certain type of fan that's like does not want to see diversity in characters. The new Star
Mm,
Wars TV show, people are like,
Hmm.
slamming it because it's not a Luke Skywalker. I'm like,
Right.
why does it have to be a Luke all the time?
Right. I mean, I think it really comes down to a lot of people who are upset about seeing women in lead roles, and especially in a male dominated, realm. I think a lot of it really does come from like insecurity from
Mm,
those people. Cause I mean, we all matter. We all need to make the world go round. But yeah, women are, you know, always sexualized in those roles too. And, if someone can't like if someone isn't like attracted to a woman in a role, they can be written off. Whereas on the flip side, if it's a male that maybe isn't the, cookie cutter hot guy, like nobody cares. But we hold women to such a high standard, as well as when women are aging as well. Like we will call older guy like a silver fox, or like, you know, zaddy or whatever. But when a woman gets older, it's like, "Oh, she's aging out. She only has a couple years left in her prime." I mean, it's
yeah,
obvious around our culture how
totally.
we treat women, and that needs to change. And I have so many amazing men in my life who value women, and I know that it's um, a real thing to have like good men. My husband is incredible.
It's a
He's so
challenge.
supportive. Yeah, and they do exist, but that it's rare.
But it seems like there's so much insecurity
Mm,
and in terms of like they feel like their vision of the world's being challenged
mhm,
and they can't understand like no, I have a daughter and my daughter is
mhm,
is an illustrator and
mm,
and she's into graphic arts and she does a lot of female centered characters.
yeah.
And if she puts them out there, you get these fan people
Mhm,
immediately because she's pushing female centered characters and when they don't
mhm.
like, and
Yep.
he's found different arenas to go
Mhm.
into, diversity initiatives
Yeah.
and people, kind of feminist leading illustrator or
Right.
fancy type of artist. But it's like why can't you be accepted? Like why can't somebody watch Star Trek? They saw Uhura back in
Mm.
the old days, and that was Gene Roddenberry. That was radical to
Right.
have her out there because that's not what people expected, you know.
Mhm.
And it's like easier to not to give them what they expect. It's
Mhm.
harder to give them what they don't expect.
Right, right. And I mean, when I introduce myself to people, I'm obviously not saying like, "Hi, I'm Micayla, I'm a feminist." Like, it's I think the word feminist has a lot of negative connotations. But really,
Mhm.
if you believe that men and women should have equal rights, then you're a feminist. There's radical feminism, and that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking
Yeah,
about just the basic, men and women
humanity.
should be treated equally and have basic rights. And it's interesting, it really, really, really does break down to an insecurity. Um, People who aren't, comfortable, or men who aren't comfortable in their masculinity, tend to be the ones who feel the most threatened, because they think that their masculinity is threatened by someone else being feminine. But that's just not true. It's usually those people who are, yeah, the most insecure. But anyways, that's a whole, rabbit hole. But it
Mhm.
is very evident in the entertainment industry, especially in, the male dominated parts of it, such as, comics, superheroes. So, yeah.
Even me like hip hop culture,
Mm,
there's a lot of female hip hop artists now that are
mhm.
taking the lead, but there's so much misogyny in
Oh, so
hip
much misogyny, yeah. Mhm.
in a lot of the hip hop and it's like doesn't have to be that way because I kind of grew up with the old school, like actually
Yeah.
crafting a rhyme that wasn't
Mhm.
misogynistic, that actually had some wit
Right.
to it. It's kind of
Mhm.
like Bob Dylan level wit,
Right.
like
Mhm.
why don't you go back to something that actually takes effort and skill and
Mm.
actually, you know, you have to think about it. You have to construct a rhyme that's relevant
Right.
rather than something that's just bombastic, that's
Yeah.
just designed to, you know, trigger people.
Right.
It's like this seems like people go for the common denominator, the lowest
Mm.
common denominator to get where they want to go to the number of views or listens
Mhm.
without considering, the impact.
Yeah. Clickbait.
Yeah, so we live in a clickbait world, but it's,
Mhm.
I always tell people, like, if you think about it, you get 1,000,000 views, but there are people who've gotten less than, those big view numbers, that if you actually reach the right person,
Mm.
you can have an opportunity. So it's not
Right.
always about the numbers. It's like sometimes if your post hits the right person, it can have a cascading effect, and then you end up getting pinged by that person. You get to work on something. And so the
Mhm.
numbers don't actually represent the potential opportunity
Right.
of, like, you being scared to put out an idea because you think, oh, no
Mhm.
one's going to get it, or it's too vulnerable,
Right.
or you're scared of the haters. But if you put it out there, then you might find out that there are other people who
Right.
respond to it.
Yeah. I think that if we just try to be good at our core, we'll eventually somehow be rewarded for it. Hopefully.
But it's hard. It's like you said, you have to show up. Like, you kept
Mhm.
on going with your podcast.
Yeah.
It's kind of like my story. I started my podcast back in 2016. A guy named Rock Tunes brought me in, and he interviewed me, and then we liked each other so much we did a
Mhm.
podcast for 6 months together.
Mhm.
Then he kind of left, and I kept it going.
Mhm.
And then I still been doing it,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like I felt like it was important to give voices, give a voice to people like emerging and independent artists, or people who were
Right.
saying something that I thought was interesting,
Mhm.
and it needed to get heard.
Mm.
And I think that's what's great about the podcast world is the fact that you can be out here and talk in a long form way
Right.
that's not like just the 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 90-second little bait, click bait we were
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
So in terms of I guess looking in your background and asking some questions, like, what made you want to get into philosophy? Like, why is that a topic you feel is like relevant today? There are a lot of people, like, they go to school and they want to learn something like, banking, insurance, medicine.
Mm.
Philosophy is like, what do you want that for? What do you get? Like, what was your motivation?
Mhm. Yeah. I studied communications, which, as most people know, it's a sector of marketing in college, with a minor in music media and enterprise, and then another minor in women's studies. And I was satisfied with that. I was happy I went to college. I don't think college is, the most important thing for some people. Obviously, if you're going to be a doctor or teacher, you need to go to college. But is it necessary for everyone? No. But I'm glad I went. I'm proud of myself for pushing through. And I left college, and like I said earlier, like I was kind of sad because after a year went by, and I'm like, whew, so relieved I'm not in school anymore. But then I wanted more, and it was around the time that I had decided to leave organized religion. I grew up very, very, very religious in the Christian church, evangelical sector. And I have nothing against like people who want to practice organized religion. My family is still very religious, totally fine. But I just didn't agree with some of the stuff, specifically around LGBTQ rights and, the way that women are viewed and treated in those circles. So I left the church, and my husband had the same feelings. And, we're navigating that together and navigating how our relationships looked with like our friends and family. And, I, when you take a step back from the structure you have been, you know, put in your entire life, the conditioning you've been given, uh, you're breaking down your entire belief system. And with philosophy, I started like just asking deeper questions, and I realized that what I was thinking about was philosophy. And it's ironic because in high school I had dated someone who ended up going to college and studying philosophy. And when I was super religious, I was like, "Ooh, that's really weird and like liberal and oh, like what the heck?" And it's just ironic that I now have a philosophy
You're drawn to
podcast.
it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, but like I think philosophy is great for anyone, but especially if someone's looking for another kind
It
of
really
yeah,
dives into the meaning of life. I mean,
yeah, a little
you can't,
structure and yeah. Mhm.
I remember, I took some courses on Camus and Sartre, and
Mhm.
people talking like the question, "Oh, if the tree falls in the forest, do you know it? Do you hear it or not hear it?"
Right. Is a
But
chair
but
a chair? Yeah.
but the whole idea of like looking at life through different lenses
Mhm.
and looking at like words and concepts, from different perspectives and kind of open yourself up to like a wider kind of expansive
Right.
view of things. And it tends to be like if you think about it, like any group that is like, well, I believe in freedom for me, but
Mm,
freedom for me suppresses the freedom of other people. It's like, well, what kind of freedom is that?
right. Yeah,
So
those
you have
hard
to
questions.
you have to
Mhm.
ask harder questions. Like, is your freedom so valuable that it takes away
Right.
freedom from other people?
Right.
And is that a valid like thing for society? It's a
Mhm.
societal question. You can argue it. You can
Mhm.
make like pro and con. You can start talking about it. It's just when people take actions,
Right.
then you have to consider it's like, well, these actions, if they harm larger number of people, you have to consider is like what's the validity of these actions in
What's
these beliefs.
moral? Yeah.
Yeah, you have to start and there's some ideas like, oh, is there morality
Right.
or not? It's like, what's it based on? Is it
And what I've
based
found is, when growing up in religion, in my experience, I found that a lot of people want to make it black or white. But
Yeah.
in reality, life is the gray area. And
Right.
not that you shouldn't have any strong values or opinions, but, a lot of times there isn't a black or white answer. It does need to be kind of, left up for interpretation because there's so many different circumstances and like everything is so subjective, and that's where philosophy comes in, because with like really hard issues that we're facing in our government right now, like it oftentimes get thrown on like uh a pendulum of, is it left
Yes
or
or no,
right,
yes or
yes, no,
color,
left, right, black, white.
red or blue.
Yeah, 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 literally. It's sad because it's like we're not looking at things circumstance by circumstance. It's just like we're slapping a label on it. Americans love labels, right? Like we love to label things and like have like a stark
It can be
answer,
very,
but
yeah, it's so
mhm,
destructive because like there's a wide, if you look at the world, there's all these different colors, right? There's all these different like
right.
values to the colors, right? And the different grades, like between black and white, between
Yeah,
like the whole spectrum. And when you say there's only red and blue, there's only black and white.
right,
And
right.
then there's so many things in between. And then what happens is like
Mhm.
people are invalidated, you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
people, concepts are invalidated, words are invalidated. And
Mhm.
so that becomes so dynamic, the resistance between like X and Y and north and south is like it's too it actually creates too much I don't know, conflict. It
Yeah,
actually is the recipe for conflict
yeah,
versus the recipe for actually pulling together, the opposite of like trying to actually pull together as a nation and go to the moon. Pull
exactly.
together as a nation, get rid of
Mhm.
cancer. Pull together as a nation, give people the right, everybody the right to vote. And then it's like, oh, take away this because it's going to hurt me. Take away this from them. It tends to be the new thing.
Right.
I gotta suppress this because it offends me.
And it kind of comes back to that whole, I mean, our country is built on, hyper masculine patriarchal values. And a lot of those things, these issues that we're dealing with come back to people being insecure and feeling threatened. Because when you feel threatened, then you're gonna want to, make sure that
Well,
you're
then, yeah,
comfortable. And yeah,
numbers threaten. When you see numbers that say maybe you're going to be outnumbered,
right.
but does that mean that you're being not listened to? Right? So people just automatically jump from 0 to 100,
Mm-hmm.
and then they said, well, this is a threat, and it's kind of
Right.
like that. They want to stay safe. It's kind of like the
Mm-hmm.
human nature is to stay safe, and for the
Yeah.
person who's very insecure, to stay safe, they want to put up barriers, they want to put up walls, they want to put up
Mm-hmm.
rules to stay safe because they feel threatened by what? X. They get threatened by Y. They get threatened by what? They come up with whatever they're threatened by.
Yeah.
And instead of talking about it, they just immediately act on it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
It's everybody is living in a world that's very, it's hard today because so many things happening. You got climate change, you got the political change in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Things are getting more kind of politically volatile across the
Mm-hmm.
planet. you know,
Mhm.
all over the planet, and because of resources being drained and people
Right.
have their roles shifted, concepts shifted, it's
Mhm.
threatening to certain people who had a certain position over time. And you
Right.
can understand that, but it's like at some point you have to, push back and say, what do you believe as
Right.
a citizen of the world?
Mhm.
You
And
gotta have
it's
impact.
dicey, and there's a lot of really bad things going on, and people just being treated so horribly, and it's not okay. But despite, everything going on in the world and, all the bad things we see in the media, because there are so many, I really do think that we are on a better trajectory. Because at the core of like human desire, we all do want to just like better humanity. And so I do believe that we are seeing a positive impact as we grow and evolve as a species. I think that, even just looking at my generation versus my parents' generation, like my generation's a little more open to therapy and, accepting other people if they're different than
Yeah.
you. And, there are things that I've seen like we are progressing on and just like little changes here and there. So I do have hope. And I don't ever want to be just like super negative about the world.
I think I
But I
think there's
do,
always hope.
yeah, there's always hope. And we have to, like two things can exist at once, right? We can acknowledge the hurt and the horrific things happening, but then also acknowledge that life is beautiful in a lot of ways. Another thing where it's not just black and white. You got
Well,
to acknowledge all of it.
if you look at the arc of history, it tends to go toward like justice, and
Mhm.
you can have kind of peaks and valleys,
Yeah.
and you can have kind of retrenchment. Doesn't mean you're not still on the upward trajectory to the
Mm.
the, the wider things. Anytime you run into a situation, there is kind of a pushback,
Right.
and you can be in a phase, and that phase when you're in it can seem substantial.
Hmm.
But like the overall, like you said, the new generation is more accepting, is
Hmm.
more understanding, is more empathetic.
Hmm.
Is more willing to have the conversation
Hmm.
with somebody maybe doesn't have the same point of view,
Right.
right? But talk and not immediately put up the wall.
And
That
that's
right
something
there,
I feel like
that's
we all
positive.
need to work on. Yeah, yeah. Like the idea of exchanging information and exchanging beliefs and ways of thinking without trying to prove anything, but simply exchanging information for, you know, the betterment of society. Like, hey, this is how I see it, and having like a diplomatic conversation rather than a like uneducated argument
Oh
where you're
yeah.
just putting each other down. So yeah, I mean, and that's very very philosophical. To have an argument structure and to learn how to properly argue or discuss something. So yeah.
Well, it's like the point of like if you have a conversation, a lot of times, if you really start getting more evolved, you start to realize you need to listen probably more than speak at some points, right? Because a lot of times when
Oh
people
yeah.
are communicating, they're spending all the time trying to win the conversation
Right.
rather than listening to the other person's point of view. They're thinking about the next word response to what the person said without fully
Exactly.
digesting what they said.
Mhm.
So when you become more aware of your own like vulnerabilities and your own
Mhm.
insecurities, you start to realize like maybe I should listen and not get triggered and
Mhm.
actually listen to the complete thought
Yeah.
before I jump to a conclusion.
I think that's one of the hardest things to do.
It's a very
Mhm.
hard thing. You have to train yourself.
Mhm.
You have to train your brain,
Mhm.
train your mouth, train yourself because you want to, tend to go to the safe place
Yeah.
and try to put up the wall, try to win the argument, try to, not really listen. But
Mhm.
that's the harder thing to do as you get older. You potentially get wiser, or you become more entrenched.
Yeah. Yeah.
You try to
No, I
balance
agree.
because it's life's a balance. You either keep on learning or you become more entrenched. And I've met a lot of older people that are actually still learning, and I've met people
Yeah.
that they're kind of retrenching. And
Yeah, I
so it
think we
depends
should
on,
always keep learning. We should always, if we're comfortable and we're, stagnant, I don't think that that's very helpful. I think I don't remember who said this. It was some like actor or actress, and someone asked if they still got nervous when they performed or something on the lines of that, and they said, "Yeah, I still get nervous. If I'm not nervous, then I need to stop doing what I'm doing." And
yeah,
I liked that because yeah, I feel like when we start getting really comfortable with anything, it's probably a sign that we need to move on. Because I've said so many times on our podcast, and this is not an original thought by any means, but when we stop, well, growth comes from uncomfortability and being in weird positions and trying things that maybe don't feel like 100% right, but and putting ourselves out there and failing and you know
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a old well, I was watching this statement from David Bowie,
Mm,
and basically he said, "As an artist, I love to tread water." And he said,
mm,
"What do you mean?" He's like, "I like to put myself in positions where I'm not comfortable,
mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
I could totally master something, and then the next project I'll go to something I don't know anything about."
Right.
Like we went from Ziggy Stardust to he worked with Luther Vandross. But
Mhm.
Luther Vandross could sing better than he could technically, right?
Right, right,
And he put himself in a situation where he's actually with a singer that sings better than him
right.
to actually learn something about how to sing American soul music.
Mhm.
And then he recreated that song, the American,
Mhm.
and he was singing that, and he would do that, he put himself with Stevie Ray Vaughan, who's a better guitar player than anything he
Mhm.
could do. He would put himself into situations where he wasn't the best at what and some people are afraid of that.
Mm.
Some people never want to put themselves in a room with somebody's way better than them
That's
and learn
humbling,
it
yeah.
as a teaching experience. And to me, I was like, that's really core to how
Mhm.
you can, you don't have to be David Bowie, but you can take that nugget
Mhm.
and things like there's nothing wrong with putting yourself in a little discomfort to gain knowledge or to gain experience.
Yeah, agreed. Mhm.
But like I think you had mentioned at the beginning, like ADHD and how it
Mhm.
affects your life, and you've mentioned, like is doing the podcast actually help, or being in routines that how does that help with your ADHD?
So, I think there's a common misconception around ADHD that it's like the image that comes to mind is a little boy sitting in class getting distracted by a squirrel outside. But it's a neurological disorder that affects a lot of people. I don't have the exact statistics, but I would venture to say it affects probably like 40 to 50% of our population. And a lot of people just don't know they have ADHD.
Mhm.
But I, was diagnosed as a child, was told I had ADHD, but I didn't really understand the full effect of that until I reached my 20s. And I was really struggling. And all the things I was struggling with were classic ADHD like symptoms, like chronic procrastination, feeling of doom when I like am in like the state of paralysis and can't get anything done because my day didn't start the certain way that I thought it should or something. Or, hyperfixating on tasks once I start them, which is a good ADHD trait that I like. Uh, Sometimes it takes a second to get started on something, but once I am in that hyperfixation zone, I can go for hours on the task at hand. But a podcast that really, really helped me and opened my eyes was this podcast called ADHD for Smartass Women, hosted by Tracy Otsuka. And it's available wherever you get your podcasts. And she just starts her podcast at the beginning of her ADHD journey, which is when her son got diagnosed with ADHD. And she started hearing all of his symptoms and thinking, oh, I have ADHD, but it's extremely understudied in women. So oftentimes we get overlooked because our symptoms don't always present the same way as men
Right.
or young boys. And a lot of people think it's something you grow out of, but it's not. It's, like I said, it's a neurological disorder. And I don't like using the word disorder either, because to me, it's like a lot of ways my superpower.
Yeah.
I like how my ADHD brain thinks, because it often leads to, a lot more creative people. A lot of creatives have ADHD or
Yeah.
autism. And I think that's, again, it can be used as a superpower if you know how to, counteract the negative parts of it, because there are a lot of positives. Pardon me, one of my dogs is barking, but
Yeah, I have seen it as like the secret sauce of a life. Being a producer, I
yeah.
work with a lot of creative people, and I have noticed
Mhm.
that there's a lot of autism, a lot of ADHD.
Yeah.
Artists have a lot of these things that people might think are detriments, but it's actually
Mhm.
part
Yeah.
of their talent. Like they learned how to integrate it and have that
Yeah.
focus. Like I've met a lot of artists, they can be kind of scattered, and then when they get onto something, they're just totally on it. And
Mhm.
then they're just on it for like so like diving into it, and
Oh,
they
yeah,
find
locked in.
they get locked in and they find it. I'm like, wow.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
sometimes it's like the journey as your producer is like, well, I got to get them to that. But it just
Right.
and I can't always figure out how to get them to that, because it's
Mhm.
like I don't know their pattern and I don't know what's doing it. I have to try to understand, right?
Right.
And you have to try to get empathy and understand. It's like it's not going to be just like an ABC structure. For some people, it's
Mm.
not always the same thing.
Mhm.
And we have a world that wants to put people in a box,
Yes.
and they like these repeatable processes, and they want you to be like a robot and just be able to do that all the time.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, creative people, we can't do that all the time. Like we have
Mhm.
different ways we get into our process.
Yeah.
And if it's not hitting, a lot of musicians say, "Well, it's not hitting today." Well, because it's not going to hit today.
Truly. Mhm.
It's not going to work
Yeah.
today. So you might want it to work today, but it's not.
Right. Oh, that's so true. And that's why, we go through dry spells as creatives, because, like I said at the beginning of the episode, it's more so learning discipline and figuring out ways to get yourself into that, mindset. Another thing that ADHD, you know, can sometimes lead to negatively is this thing called RSD, rejection sensitive disorder. And a lot of people with ADHD have it. And it's when you are, hyper aware and hyper sensitive to rejection, just as it sounds in the name. And that can, pose a huge threat as a creative, as an artist trying to put yourself out there, because the fear of rejection, for a regular person is, huge. But for someone who like literally has like part of their disorder, it can be really hard. And the negative self-talk can be one of the biggest deterrents for getting into that creative space, because I could have a cool idea, but I could immediately shoot myself down and be like, no, that's dumb, like nobody's gonna care,
Like
nobody's gonna
imposter
listen, like,
syndrome.
yeah,
Kind of
like
like the imposter
yep,
syndrome, right?
imposter syndrome is, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, can I see that with art? I mean, I could go to,
Mhm.
I see a painter, go to
Mhm.
his loft, he got like 100 paintings in his loft, and I like, these are all brilliant.
Mhm.
And he's like, I'm not ready. I'm like, these aren't in the gallery. He's like, I'm not ready. Because they just, somebody might have said one thing, and it
Right.
just triggered them. And they're like, oh, yeah, this stuff's not ready. It's not good. Or they even themselves, they're self imposter talks like, it's not brilliant enough. And then they prevent themselves from actualizing, because
Mhm.
they just, it's kind of the heart of being an artist. You have to be vulnerable and authentic.
Mhm.
You have to kind of get over that negative feedback that comes in, because everybody's, not everybody's going to like it. Like
Right.
most of the time when you're doing something really innovative, the first time you show it, people like, they don't like it. I mean,
Right.
it's like you go over all the, Bob Dylan, first time he went electric, they started booing him.
Mhm.
And the one thing I love about the tape I have, he basically, they said they called him a Judas, and they said to get off stage, and he said, I don't believe you. And he kept
Mhm.
on playing for another hour
Mm.
in a totally different way than he had been playing. He had been doing folk music, and he switched to an electric band,
Right.
and he had like total rejection.
Right.
Total, most artists would just like left 5 minutes after that, like rejection. They would have just left, and he
It's
didn't leave.
wild.
He stayed. And the weird thing, that's 66, and by 1972, that style was filling stadiums. But in
Right.
'66, he was ahead of the curve, and people didn't know what to think about that. It was like, what
Mhm.
is this? But sometimes, like you're on that kind of spectrum where you're ahead of the curve,
Mhm.
and if you let that self doubt and imposter syndrome stop you, you'll never get to the public, and nobody will ever hear it. Nobody
Mhm.
will ever see it.
Well, the beginning's the hardest part, and I'm still very much so in the beginning. Um, you know, I released some music in 2018, 2019, and then 2020, and I haven't since, and I'm releasing a new song probably within the next month or two. And, I'm excited about it. Yeah, thanks. I'm excited about it, but at the same time, it's like one of the songs I wrote when I was younger that I kind of just want to get out of my system. And then I have some more, songs planned that are more like my adult psyche, if that makes sense. But
Mhm.
um, what I was gonna say is a perfect example. Two artists that come to mind that are very similar are Lady Gaga when she first started out, and Chappell Roan. Lady Gaga obviously has been doing this for a long time. Chappell Roan has been doing this for a long time, has just now gained popularity. She's 26. Lady Gaga is in her late 30s, I believe. So makes sense timeline wise. But there's videos of both of them and lots of artists, but these two in particular that I'm thinking of because they're both very like
Eccentric.
eccentric,
Yeah. Again,
eccentric, and kind of out there and wild and unique. And there's videos of them like at little tiny venues with their like little keyboard set up and like 10 people that they're playing for, and they're just as crazy and weird and cool
they
as
are
they
now.
are now. And I just think about how much well, actually, how little they had to have cared about what people think about them or pretend to, at least, to be able to have the guts to do that. And I admire them so much because, anyone can get up and sing on a mic, but to get up and sing in a crazy outfit and you're singing about maybe some like, stuff that people don't usually hear
Don't say
about in
about.
a song.
Yeah.
Especially Lady Gaga because she did
She
this in a
pushes.
time where it was like really out there. But now she's seen as one of the most respected artists in the world, really.
Yeah.
And she did something completely different than
Typical.
had been done
Yeah,
before. Yeah.
a lot. Lady Gaga. I see a lot of parallels with Bowie.
Oh
Because
yeah. Yep.
Bowie,
Hmm.
when he first hit the scene in like
Yep.
65,
Huge
66,
parallels.
he came out like wearing a Beatles kind of suit with a tie,
Hmm.
no
Hmm.
crazy hair, no costumes or anything. Came out as David Jones,
Right.
instead of Bowie.
Uh-huh.
Didn't work. I've got like videos of him doing it, and it's just as good
Hmm.
as the Ziggy stuff. It's just as good as his Thin White Duke, his Lad say it's just as good as
Exactly.
any of it. But he was doing it, but he didn't have the theater. And then he kind of took it and said, "Well, you know what? I like theater. What if I
Hmm.
bring theater into this?"
He created a character.
So he just became like a method actor
Hmm.
on stage as a musician.
Right.
And I think Lady Gaga took the idea. It's a common
Hmm.
idea in music that a lot of people do that. They become like their stage self.
Right.
And then they change their stage self. Prince used to do it. He used to become a
Right.
character for every
Right.
album. And when you do that, you have some separation from who you really are.
Right.
And in parts of that, is you. Part of that is you. You're projecting kind of a piece of you,
Yeah.
but you amplify all this other stuff for this kind of theater. And it's somehow it gives you some separation
Yeah, I would
when
I
you
would
do
love
it.
to find that for myself, like I'd love to find some kind of character to become. Like fast forward to today, I was just talking about Chaperone. She didn't blow up until she did her Tiny Desk performance, and at her Tiny Desk performance, she was dressed in drag, and she like literally like has this huge red hair and the
Oh,
you
my
know
daughter showed me that. Yeah,
the
my daughter.
incredible makeup, yeah,
She's
and then the world like latched onto her, especially the LGBT community and the drag community, which I'm obsessed with, and she just makes this fun, relatable pop music that is very much so like Lady Gaga, but she has her complete unique spin on it, and yeah, it wasn't until she found that character that she was able to really unlock like who she is as a performer. And yeah, I hope for that for myself. I don't see who she could be, but hopefully that is
it just
revealed to me
happens.
someday.
Sometimes it just happens. It's like in terms of my music, I created a character
Mhm.
when I first showed up, and it became a kind of female version of myself called
Mhm.
Josephine Electric,
Oh,
and I
cool,
used to
yeah.
wear this kind of phantom mask. It was like a ghost, right? So I'm like,
Incredible.
and then I played in New York, and nobody could see my face, but they see this like phantom mask and this LED outfit, and
Mhm.
because I could shift voices, because I had this technology like vocoders that can pitch shift in real
Mhm.
time. And so I could change to this like female voice character that I wrote songs for, that I realized that when I
Ah.
found that character,
Mhm.
it kind of increased my confidence. I actually wasn't confident in my male
Mhm.
voice. And so
Mhm.
when I presented this other character, I got more confident. And eventually I learned
Mhm.
how to use my male voice. But it's just like sometimes you have to find something, and I found this kind of female part of myself that I
Right.
wrote as a songwriter. And I was like, what if I write these songs that I would send to like a woman to sing? What if I
Mhm.
sang them in this female pitched voice?
Mhm.
And then I found this way to do it, and it made me separated from like other people, because other
Yeah.
people weren't doing that at all,
Yeah.
like at the time. But sometimes you can find something that's like it was kind of part of what I was doing anyway. I was
Mhm.
writing in a style, and I was like giving it to other people, and I was like, "What if I actually sing it myself?"
Mhm. You know, and
You never know.
yeah, yeah, and I it's so funny you say that because I think the reason we do that is not only I'm not saying, like, the reason Lady Gaga and Chapel and, David Bowie do this is because of this, but I think a lot of the reason it's easier to show up as somebody else is because then you're not personally threatened when there's haters. There's gonna be inevitably people who don't like what you're doing. And I think it's probably easier to separate when you can have 2 different personas and be like, it's okay, that's who cares what they say?" Like, that's
Yeah,
my
it
character,
was
and
it
yeah.
gives you the protection. It kinda gives you that
Right.
protection that you need for the self. You need to protect that your id and super ego, and if you felt like, "Well, that wasn't me, that was Josephine, or that was Z, that was
Right.
Aladdin Sane, or that's like other Gaga," that's like who she presents, and then she can go out and walk out, and nobody even knows that's her, because she looks totally different than she did on stage. You can
Right.
sit in the audience and nobody even knows it's you, right?
Mhm.
So you be on stage and come sneak into the audience, and it's like, oh, you don't even know it's the same person. There's an artist that would do that just
Right.
to see what would happen.
Mhm.
And I think it does give you, like you said, the separation. And the thing is, like, you can kind of put yourself in a mind frame.
Mhm.
I was talking to a guy who was like, he's like a life coach, and he said he kind of puts himself into a character when he
Mm.
does his like TED talks and stuff. And I'm like, wow,
Mhm.
yeah, you can see that, because is that really that our speech? Is that really like your
Your
dinner table
cadence, yeah.
talk or is
Uh-huh.
that how you talk when you're on a stage?
Right.
Because this
Yeah.
tends to be how you can get it over.
I'd love to hear, like, a psychologist's take on this and, like, self-preservation, because it really is a mind trick, right? Like, it's all in our minds because imagine if everyone could just radically be themselves and show up exactly how they want to. How crazy would our world be, right? But it's definitely all in our heads, and confidence is in our heads, and, insecurity, it's all, like it's all just, like, something we tell ourselves and our negative self-talk, and, yeah, I'd love to hear, like, somebody's thoughts on that, like, who studies human behavior on a daily basis. It's wild.
Yeah, because over time, eventually, like you might do that to get there, and then eventually your true like self shows up. You do
Well,
an
Lady
interview.
Gaga, I mean,
Yeah, and now
if you
she's an
look at
actor. She
yeah,
could
if
be
you
an
look at
actor.
when she, when they came out with A Star Is Born, I think that was the first time, like, obviously she wasn't playing herself in the movie, but it was the first time we could see, like, Stephanie, you
Yeah,
know? It was the first time we could see, like,
not the
her,
project
yeah,
Gaga.
her with no makeup on and, like, raw, and I think that people, heavily disrespected her and did not appreciate her at the beginning of her career. But, like, she's a classically trained performer with
Yeah, she's brilliant.
incredible credentials, and she's insanely talented, and I'm just so glad that she's finally getting her flowers, that people can see, like, how incredible she is and everything she's done for the LGBT community and, so many different, oppressed communities, and, she's just so cool. So, yeah.
It's important to be able to speak like that and not have the fear. because
Mhm.
because some people will get out there and they'll just say, well, that's going to mess up my market share.
Right.
Like so they'll then they won't really be an advocate for anything. They won't, and so to me, it's important
Mm.
when you see an artist that's willing to kind of bear that, assault from certain people. They will say, you should either this thing of like, oh, you should only be an actor. You shouldn't have cause. You should just be an athlete. You shouldn't say anything. Like you should only do one thing. Is any
Mhm.
human being just one thing?
Right.
Not really, but you want to make them that one thing that
Right.
you approve of. And you don't
Right.
want to hear they might believe in this or they might believe in that or they might
Right.
support this. Well, they're a human being. Why can't they do that?
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
want them
at
to
the
be
end of the day, it's wild that people have so many opinions and care so much about, whether, boys wear dresses or not, because we're all just on this floating rock in this huge universe and nothing really matters. And it's wild that we sit and, you know, try to tell other people what to do and what to wear, where
yeah,
when
it's
it's
just
all
like
just the social constructs that we've made up.
yeah.
Everything's made up.
Well, I mean, human beings, if you go back and you cycle through a couple, 1,000 years, you go in like men were wearing things that you would think are
Yeah,
dresses, right? You go to
exactly.
indigenous cultures, like what are you talking about? It's like this
Exactly.
this is not necessarily female or male. It's just like this is a human dress, and you've
Exactly.
now put this label on it because that's where your
Mhm.
head is now.
Mhm.
1,000 years ago, it wasn't there.
Right.
So, like, if you, it's a matter of the context and understanding, like where you are, um, and not really caring. Like if you start to, you know, give up that power that somehow you want to control so
Mhm.
much. And it's a lot of it is like you're
Yeah.
so scared of being out of control that you're trying to control things you really can't control.
Yep.
Um, and it's
Exactly.
it's a paradox. How do you deal with that?
Literally. You ponder it in philosophy. That's what you do.
Well, it's cool that your podcast that you do that, that you have this wide ranging because one of the things that's interesting, I was told a couple of times like, oh, you have a very narrow focus on your podcast. You should only do like X. I'm like, really?
Mm,
Because it's like if I feel like taking on something or doing something or talking to somebody, why can't I like I can only be in this format? Because we're
right.
so segmented. Even from
Mhm.
like marketing, people want to say, well, I want to know that you're like this. I'm like, but I can't tell you that I'm like that because I might not be like that tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, we're always evolving. Mhm.
You
Yeah.
should have the freedom to evolve.
Yeah, exactly.
But I want to thank you again for being on the show. And if for your website, is that just for the show for the podcast, or is that for other things that you do?
Yeah, so that website will take you directly to all of our episodes or my episodes. Season 1 with Maddie and then season 2 as well, just me. If you wanna start from the beginning, I would start beginning of season 2. It's where I changed the format and it's just me and there's a bunch of really, really neat guests. Um, as far as my personal Instagram goes, that's at Micayla Ree, Micaylarie. That's where you can find, you know, my personal posts, but also, um, that's my artist name, so you can find me at Micayla Ree on Apple and Spotify. I'll be releasing a new song soon called Dandelion. And there's a PHILOSOshe Instagram as well. It's philoso.she, but feel free to
That's awesome.
message me or anything. So
Yeah, because we love to have people on multiple times. So like once you have your music out, if you
Oh,
wanted to
yes.
talk about that as a separate podcast on that, we can
That
do
would
that.
be really fun. Yeah.
Yeah,
Love that.
we like because that's where we started with singer songwriters.
Yes.
So if you want to do that, I'd be cool with that. You just check my calendar and book it for when we has the most impact for your song.
Yeah,
But
that'd be
thank you
awesome.
again for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was a wonderful conversation. So, thank you. Wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.